themselves as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Shafir Razak. I'll be the panelist for this round. Good luck everyone who made it this far.
Awesome. Before we start the round, couple of things. First, debaters can introduce themselves before they start off your own speeches. Gender preference are not compulsory. However, because it's online debate, make sure like you give the POI preferences as you require. Second of all, do time up your speeches even if you're not speaking. Try to time up so that you know when to offer POIs and when not to. And thirdly, I will try to give timestamps in the chat at 1, 7, 8 and 8:15. After 8:15, we are not noting down anything. Being said that, if we don't have any further issues, inviting Prime Minister to open the debate. Here.
Hello, can I check if I'm audible and visible?
Yeah.
Okay, that is wonderful. Thank you. Prefer pronunciation of verbal POIs, please. Do give me some POIs. I'd love to take a few, but don't brag too much. Also, short shout out to my teammates. These are wonderful people. I'm so glad to be here with them. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. In the same way that ideologically, it is impossible to escape out of a system that you are bound by the rules of the system, it should not be the case that you should abide by the social norms to escape the social norms. And I think by this premise alone, we can already weigh out on the opposition. I want to first deal with the characterization then. What are queer movements in liberal democracies? We think they look like, the support for gay, lesbians, bi, ROAs, that sort of thing, trans people, polyamorous people. These are the type of people that they're supporting, right? And we think that the principles of this movement is to challenge the social norm and also to become a new social norm in which they want to recreate a new social identity, right? We think that here they still face a lot of opposition within society. Gay marriage is still not legal in a lot of liberal democracies, say the US, Canada, yeah, right. And many conservative groups exist within these places as well that act as a check or structural barrier that prevents them from opting into such. An example is that US already has a large amount of conservatives and far rights in like Texas or the down south that end up rejecting this premise. We think that rejecting as a marriage as an institution then looks like rejecting the traditional social or religious institution of marriage. We want to accept marriage is intrinsically about the human condition and the experience of love between two individuals, which does not require a legal or religious social contract behind it to determine the marriage. We want to tell the queer community that the relationship is what they deem it to be. Just two things. You don't need a legal contract, and you can go ahead to call each other like your boyfriends. Go ahead. If you want to call yourself husbands, go ahead. If two gay people want to get married, then they don't need to decide between like a bride and a groom. Both of them can be grooms. Both of them can be brides. We think that marriage then in status quo looks like a social and legal contract, right? Because the social institution of marriage is three things. Inherently religious, where they get married off in church, you send your daughter off to somewhere. A traditional heteronormous institution that reinforces gender norms, like e.g., the woman is childbearer, man is the breadwinner. 3, highly contradictory to the radicality of the queer movement and the challenge of the social norms within liberal democracies. And secondly, it's also characterized by the terms and conditions that come behind marriage. People usually opt into marriage when they want to have children and share money, or these are the terms and conditions that you have to abide by if you want to get married. And these are all enforced by social pressure, high amounts of social pressure that end up making this a very high obligation. We also think that marriage is a highly religious thing. So opting into marriage is also submitting to harmful norms or harmful ideals created by religion. Our counterfactual is simple. We explained it, but I think here opposition needs to defend a comparative where firstly, they need to defend that queer people have to submit back to social norms. Polyamorous relationships kind of can't exist. Queer people must abide to these social norms, but they are intrinsically not they are intrinsically challenging it. Gay and lesbian couples are expected to have kids, but they might even get rejected by sperm donors or whatever due to legal and social structures. The thing is, secondly, they need to defend is the principal harm where the core of the queer movement is diluted, and thirdly, increased opposition towards the queer movement. Before that, PY.
We see in current liberal democracies, there is a current trend where we see even religious institutions like Christianity, the Pope, even being fine with gay or queer marriage. I'm still unclear why is it so hostile towards these movements.
You know why? It's because that there's still a cycle of indoctrination within other means or structures within Christianity. There are still large-scale amounts of people in Texas that will literally hang you on a stake for being gay and announcing that, right? And it's this sort of visceral opposition that still takes a long time because of the prevalent social trends that have already existed before then. But thanks for the POI anyway. We think here on the argument, we want more empowerment. And the problem is threefold. Firstly, legal institutions are legal institutions are strengthened by the submission into its ideology. Three reasons why. It allows further institutional oppression, it prevents the ability to marry for queers and feed the idea, and thirdly, they have an incentive to cater to pre-existing groups, in this case, religious and conservative majorities, especially in conservative states. All of this go to indicate it is impossible to utilize legal structures to be legal structures precisely of the scale of institutions that already exist, right? That provide for this like structural barrier. Second reason is just marriages are diluted by social norms. A bit of characterization here. It's just that marriages are harmonious bondings between two individuals, and that is at its core the pure form of what a marriage is. There are a lot of societal norms that abide by it now, things like having rings or having children, etc. Right? I've characterized this enough. Three reasons why. Firstly, allowing institutional marriage submits queer individuals to a societal norm where they're already not part of the societal norm. Secondly, marriage as a principle of choice becomes a pressure and obligation for queer movements to abide by social norms that don't apply to them. Thirdly, large-scale social narratives that are unchallenged for the longest of times continue to exist. All of these go to show queer individuals are not part of the social norm and should not be subjected to the same metrics that we submit other people to. Thirdly, queer movement's core is also diluted. The core of the queer movement is the challenging of social norms. By accepting the institution of a marriage, you are acknowledging and supporting the use of both societal structures and norms and legal structures and its legitimacy, which directly clashes with the challenge that you want to make towards these institutions. We think the harm is threefold. Firstly, disempowerment of queer communities as a result of the structural opposition towards their case and like stuff, right? Secondly, the further doubt of their identity. Marriage is often the final goal of a relationship. If institutional marriage cannot allow or suit them this goal, it further harms their identity because they are not acknowledged within society. Thirdly, the principle of the queer movement dies. And I don't know if you realize, but a lot of times this means opt out because your members are disillusioned with what your movement actually has resulted in. Okay, solution. We think firstly we get more buy-in. Three reasons why. It furthers the narrative of queers challenging the societal norm via the metric and final goal of many relationships. Secondly, there's more queer couples that feel that they're being supported and that they're acknowledged. When they're allowed the final goal of marriage, they have a greater belief that you are doing good, right? And you are doing good for their game. Thirdly, people on the fence are able to buy that queers are also capable of marriage, even though in a different way. They have more buy-in that queers have rights, perhaps in different senses. And we think it's likely because queer and people are all subjected to the same ideal that marriage is the final goal of a relationship. If you can support queer marriage, it's not just about the legality, but about like the core of it. You can buy the progressiveness, and this fulfills some core of like human empathy and sympathy towards these groups. Sure, one more.
Greatest form of empowerment is when you were last time discriminated against, but now you're recognized legally and institutionally and society as being actually valid and an actual legal queer marriage. Please.
I don't think that's the reason why, because again, you are abiding by a social norm, and you cannot counter a social norm with another social norm. I think I've responded to this, but maybe I just don't get it. But thanks anyway. The second thing is just less polarization. Three reasons. Conservatives and religious groups see and value marriage as something sacred to them. If they see queer people opting in social norms, they'll make them angry and further their hatred, causing further societal backlash and negative discourse, where we now see that politicians are less likely to support as a result of the window of normalization. Comparatively, if we don't submit to something that's sacrosanct to them, apropos the religion and identity of the individual, let's say retention of their identity and value. Intrinsically, this is likely because the incentive of conservative value favor of retention of status quo. And we think that lastly, we get more empowerment because queer people define their relationship however they want and feel much happier and free in their relationship when they're not bound by societal norms. Impacts are simple. We think that we can change and redefine the social institution of marriage for queer people. We can create less opposition from conservatives because, the social norm, right? Thirdly is empowerment of queer relationships. Fourthly, on less polarization, I've proved enough on that, and the principal benefit. We say that if you don't buy this, opt claims that like submitting legal institution allows for greater empowerment. It still harms the principle and they still lose by it as a result of like the disillusionment. And we think that as a whole, when both principally and pragmatic outweighed opposition at every turn. Proud to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker for the fine speech, and now inviting the first speaker from opposition.
Hello, can I test if I'm audible, please?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Please give me a moment to set up my things. Thank you. Okay, I will be taking my POIs verbally, and I will be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, it's clear to me that proposition disregards the value marriage brings to people, while proposition is busy trying to prove why marriage institution is so horrible that they must all, but for society as a whole, why this abolishment even carries benefit at all. I am proud to say that opposition team will prove to you why queer movements not being against marriage is inherently better, including for the queer movement itself. Okay, so let me move on to some of my rebuttals. Okay, so queer people, the entire goal of the queer movement is to get accepted into society. There is no way for you to live without society, right? So they're not trying to isolate themselves and from a new society. What they want is to and get accepted into it. Okay, when queer people want legal representation, they're going to fight harder to exist. If legal systems don't work, then on both sides, they make no progress. If society is really that homophobic, both sides are going to lose out. Okay, and one moment. Okay, so let me just quickly move into my setup, okay? So marriage, right? As marriage is legally recognized in institution and law as a holy matrimony and a romantic relationship of two individuals. Okay, the romantic partnership. And legal protections such as domestic abuse laws, etc., also cover this. And it is socially recognized as the greatest form of love. That is to say, like two individuals individuals are willing to compromise and care for each other. So proposition needs to prove to us why marriage as an institution is something so horrible and is justified to go against, and why it benefits everyone as a whole. And on our case, we are going to prove to you why not going against marriage as an institution is inherently better and how it actually benefits the queer movement. Okay, so this is a liberal democracy, right? So it looks like liberal changes are starting to pop up, the social acceptance of same-sex marriages. Because yes, while there are some places who are still rather biased and homophobic towards same-sex marriages, you cannot deny that there are more same-sex marriages now than ever before. Okay, so let me take you into our argument for today. The first one, backlash from traditional values and views of marriage as an institution. The institution of marriage is seen in society, especially by some older generations or more conservative places, the queer movement to them is seen as something too radical and infringing upon the old views that are held. Currently, as I said before, there is a rising number of same-sex marriages. So clearly, the LGBTQ movement, there are members of them who have no problem getting married at all, and generally are more liberal. And in the motion, right, these liberal democracies can be a little bit conservative in the sense that they want marriage to be institutional rather than anything else. So that is the crux of this debate, to radicalize you, to face immense. So you lose immense amounts of support from these people who are married and believe it as an institution due to this. they're on the fence. Those who are on the fence, they opt out entirely. And those who support marriage as an institution find it extremely hard to justify supporting the queer movement when the queer movement is trying to abolish the institution of marriage. Okay, so why queer people and society view institutionalized marriage in such a high regard? Okay, so it's taught from young that marriage is a holy matrimony between two people as the greatest form of love. Media, cartoons, stories, literature, society as a whole reinforces it by saying that marriage is a union, and it is an equal relationship, sharing of love, and etc. Okay, so why does the queer movement actually be harmed by this rejection of institutionalized marriage? The queer movement needs as much support as it can get to obtain critical mass in order to push for more queer rights. The stronghold that should never be infringed upon was that of marriage as an institution. It is a deeply held belief from those that came before us, dating all the way back to when we first had society as an idea. To go against this not only means that you go against the current norms in society, it is to become like a pariah, an outcast, and you lose support and traction that you've been gaining for your entire movement. Queer people have always been oppressed, marginalized by the mostly heteronormative society, with their rights suppressed and minimized in an attempt to kind of preserve the purity, okay, of people. So when we lose support for the queer movement, especially from queer people already married who prefer marriage to be institutionalized, we lose a ginormous part of the force and morale as well. Fractionalization then occurs, and the movement is divided and split up between those who support institutionalized marriage and those who don't. This is even more pressing when queer people view institutionalized marriage with such a high regard. Okay. It overall makes the queer movement easy to exploit and manipulate by outside forces. And overall, the queer movement will take it as a huge blow. So if we abolish the institution of marriage, we are going to get pushback from those who believe marriage should be institutionalized. Did I receive a POI just now?
Yes.
We don't want absolute abolishment. We only want queer movements to reject it for queers. How do you engage with this?
Sorry, can you repeat? My connection isn't very stable today. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. We don't want absolute abolishment. We only want queer movements to reject it for queers. How do you engage with this?
Okay, so let me double confirm. You want the queer movement to reject marriage as in. So let me respond to this. Okay, so like you are wanting queer people to reject marriage because you say that it doesn't fit into their what they want, right? They want to break a change out of the current societal norm, but like to reject it is to basically abolish it for all queer people because it becomes a stigma that, oh, we the queer movement are going to reject marriage as an institution. And so it creates a friction between those who are married, and to reject it is to create differing opinions. And then it creates a stigma against those who prefer institutionalized marriage, and it basically creates a bad stigma against marriage in the queer community. I hope it answers your question. Okay, so let me just quickly take you into our next point, which is that, hold on. Okay, so there's in my second argument, I'll just quickly tell you how there is a higher chance of unserious relationships, less protection, and guarantee from legal institutions. With marriage getting approved by legal procedures and authorities, queer individuals have a better guarantee to protection to protect them from harmful abusive relationships by these institutions. Okay, so without legal contracts of marriage that acts as a responsibility, there is a higher chance for unserious relationships to occur because between individuals, there is no consequences that they need to bear, such as divorce fees, legal fees, etc. Without this sense of responsibility and burden, individuals won't take relationships seriously. And, well, there's so much to say that I'd really love if you could get it from my second speaker. Proud to present. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to thank this speaker for the fine speech, and now inviting the second speaker from proposition.
Okay, give me a minute. Thank you. Sorry, chat. Okay.
Oh.
Am I audible and visible?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Wait. Wait, sorry. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We believe that side opposition has misunderstood our counterfactual today. So let me provide you firstly with some clarification. Our counterfactual is actively discouraging marriage as an institution for queer people, right? We actively discourage queer couples to get married through the legal system. We don't advocate for marriage rights in their movement, right? To quote my first speaker, right? It is not like what side opposition is saying. We're not trying to suddenly redefine marriage for straight people. That is not what we're doing, right? We're trying to actively discourage queer people from trying to get married. And we have talked about how we rather advocate for our other rights, like for example, rights for trans people to change themselves to be like who they want to be, right? Those are more pressing rights that help people be seen as normal. That's what we are fighting for, okay? Let us also, secondly, look at the incentives of queer people, right? The incentives of queer people are to first of all, to be a happy couple, to be seen as normal, right? To be seen as someone who can be accepted within society, not to be rejected by people, not to be rejected by hospitals, not to be rejected by people who are vehemently, no, thank you, not to be hated by people, okay? That's why we say that when you guys marry on-site opposition, there's not really much empowerment, right? When you have to follow such rigid and legal frameworks, that's not freedom, that's not empowerment for these gay people, right? Therefore, why tie yourself down to a system that originally oppressed you? Why tie yourself down to the legal system that originally oppressed you, right? And note their lack of responses towards our case, right? Hence why our impacts of redefining the social institution of marriage for queer people, our second impact of less opposition for conservatives, third, our empowerment for queer relationships, and our fourthly, our impact of less polarization. All these four impacts still stand on our side. We have yet to hear a response. Now, first of all, I will then move on to my responses towards the LO, right? They said that we will have more opposition on our side if you want to abolish this marriage thing, but we've never said that we want to abolish marriage, right? If straight people want to go marry, we don't care. Queer movement is for queer people, right? And you said, and hence, even if you meant there would be more opposition if we try to redefine marriage for queer people, I find that doesn't make sense, right? Because the situation is actually worse on your side. Queer people do not want to get more the problem of opposition is worse on your side because you have more conservative people against you, right? Why are conservative people against gay people entering marriage? Because marriage is such a holy religious thing where you get married in the church, you're sending your daughter off to get married. It's such a holy thing that you do. And hence why these conservative traditional people are so against you trying to enter this thing that they've had for so many years, right? This religious Christian thing that they've had for a lot of years, right? Hence why we say that there's actually more opposition on your side by those conservative people, right? And even if society is so progressive as you say, we still say this is not true because you have to accept the fact that even in the US, there are still a lot of right-wing states, right? Like for example, you can see in like the current Donald Trump and Kamala Harris thing, there's still a lot of red states, right? Hence why this proves to say that there are still a lot of conservative people and the world is not as quote unquote progressive as you think or not as accepting, right? And hence why the queer movement is trying to change that. Secondly, they brought up this random point about abuse happening, right? First of all, we want to know that it is not very common. It's already not very common because it's highly frowned upon by both social and legal structures, right? Like people tell you shouldn't be a wife beater and like these laws already deter people from doing that. The narrative of being an abuser, being a violent person is already something that deters people from being an abuser, right? But we say that in normal hetero relationships, there's still domestic abuse, and it's even worse on their side because of the similar structural issues. First of all, misogyny still exists on both sides. It is precisely because people are afraid, because women are afraid to come out on their problem, because precisely they're afraid of going against their lover, that causes this abuse, right? It is not because the laws it's not because of the fact that the laws don't exist. The laws exist, right? But hetero people still are afraid to talk about their abuse because they're afraid to come out of their problem, right? Hence why they have a quote unquote problem solution mismatch, because this abuse does not come about because there's a lack of domestic abuse, the abuse laws. And third, next, we say that when queer relationships face so much pressure from societal norms, it's very rare for abuse to occur because queer people, they're trying to fight social norms for their great love, right? They're trying to go against the tides. They're trying to go against oppositions and everything. Hence why we believe that their love is greater than any hetero relationship there is. And because they're of the same gender, or in any case, there's not as much power inequality because of the structural issues on their side. Hence why their point on abuse does not stand, right? But now moving on to my extension as to why accepting the institution of marriage is so harmful on their side, and why accepting it should not be something the queer movement supports, right? First of all, when you accept the institution of marriage as normal, it makes heteronormative the standard for normal. It makes it become the benchmark for normal. We recognize that the institution of marriage is historically traditional and tied towards heteronormativity. There are men and women roles. The mom is the one childbearing, right? Hence, the harm of this is the queer movement is actively communicating the ideology that queer people are only acceptable when they mimic and copy these heteronormative norms, right? Why are you trying to make it seem that like, oh, if you want to be normal, you have to try to be like hetero couples who get married for the reason of having children, right? We just want gay people to be seen as normal. We don't want them to be seen hetero people, right? The long-term impact of this is that we recognize that queer people within our movement, they're inherently special. They all have their own unique dynamics, right? And we don't want to push onto them the narrative or the social interpretation that their relationship is that of a hetero person's, right? We can see in the status quo, like for example, people will often ask like lesbians or gay people like, oh, who's the man in your relationship? Who's the woman in your relationship, right? This is why we don't want that to happen. We don't want this heteronormative standard to be for these queer people when they need to be seen as special and accepted for themselves, not to be seen as hetero people. Secondly, we say that opposition fails to challenge current social norms, right? Because the social institution of marriage has a very specific model and stereotype to them. We say that by submitting to social norms, you paint the picture that you lose your principle of the queer movement, right? You lose the fact that you are radical and the fact that you are trying to go against it, right? Furthering you from the principles of the queer movement. And thirdly, also furthering my first point, we say that it further supports binary norms, right? The fact that marriage is rigid and restricting is a fact, right? The fact that it's only between two people is very regressing for the queer movement, because the queer movement also includes other members of our community. We have aro ace people, we have polyamorous people who still need inclusion within our queer movement, right? Hence why the harm on your side is that there's less inclusion within the queer movement. Very proud to propose. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker for this speech, and now inviting the second speaker from opposition.
May I get a minute, please? Oh yeah, POIs verbally pronounce him. Panel, to live in a society in a liberal democracy doesn't mean that it is full of conservatives. I feel then that opposition had one big problem, that the entire case stood upon conservatism and also best case, worst case scenario. I felt then that there was a problem solution mismatch, where opposition was always put at the worst case and proposition at their best. At the end of today's debate, at the end of deputy, I'm still unclear why their best case beats ours. First of all, few rebuttals then. Number one, I like to point out how the core of the queer movement is to be accepted within society. Yes, you want to challenge the social norms, but you want to challenge the social norms so that you finally accept it, not to always go on radicalizing, always just trying to push it further. I think then it was clear that only by actually accepting it and using a tool of oppression as empowerment was the only way that it got changed. I'd like to point out then how this actually works, because when you lose the fight for legal representation in marriage and institutionalized marriage, you lose the fight for legal representation. You lose the main goal. Why is that so? Because both sides agree that legal representation is also what happens in today's debate. And what happens is that when you ditch, so I say institutionalized marriage, what happens is that you ditch legal representation as a whole. Because if it truly was so true that institutionalized marriage, as said by both sides, that both sides agree upon, is one of the most important things, I think that this should be the focus of the queer movement to take down and be accepted into it. Point out then about buy-in and polarization. It's not how PM contradicts himself. They say about how they are facing many oppositions. What happens then is that we pointed out in LO that if you go against traditional values, people who are extremely conservative, and you say that now we're going against institutionalized marriage that they care so deeply about to make themselves more unique, this leaves two things. One, that you inflame them, you make it harder to reason with them because they see you as radical extremist people who are unwilling, who are going against your rights, and also the fact that I feel then I like to call out proposition for two things. Number one, panel, do not let proposition get away with squirreling and running a soft case. They say that, oh, we are going to only say that you should, I say, maybe try not and I say have an institutionalized marriage. How this is harmful. They had to take the hard stance that means that all followers of the queer movement must buy into the fact that marriage should not be institutionalized for queer people. I think that this bleeds into society by them in order to get socially accepted as marriage not being institutionalized. You need to go against the current societal norms that marriage is institutionalized. You need to create narratives that queer people are unique. The reason why that is bad is because what happens is that people on the fence who highly regard it, we gave you an LO, or why people held it to such high regard, won't actually support you anymore because you are now going against what they stood for and their beliefs. This is one of the most dangerous part. I like to take down deputy there because they said about how you are going, you want to be seen as normal. Panel, the way you get seen as normal is not trying to make yourself look unique. Rather, it was to go and flow with the norm and change and alter the norm to suit you. This looks like actually having things like same-sex marriage, looking actually legal representation by fighting for it. I think that then legal representation in institutionalized marriage was a prerequisite to any other forms because marriage is one of the most important things. Thus, in order to get legal representation, this sets the benchmark for any other form of legal representation. To give up on this is to give up on any other forms of empowerment. I want to point out that why it's actually inherently better on our side because we utilize the tools of oppression that proposition says that it's so bad to empower ourselves when the same rigid structures that have been finally broken down, that we've finally broken down what kept us shackled, and we use it as a way to empower ourselves. Looking back, seeing about how we managed to break free, that's the truest form of empowerment, where I'm finally able to marry and in a queer couple and actually be not afraid that I'm going to get persecuted. I need to point out then how proposition is being uncharitable. They say about how there's always conservatives that's opposed. But here's the thing, panel. Conservatives will always oppose on both sides no matter what. If they're so vehemently opposed against it, it doesn't matter. We think that then a proposition must get off their high horse and actually compare and be charitable.
Yo,
They need to explain why in the liberal democracy where people still hold it to such a high regard, why people would not lose buy-in. I'd like to also point out then about how they say about abuse isn't common. I'd like to point out two things. Then number one, that domestic abuse structures are there, and that's the reason why it's better. Proposition takes the worst case scenario and say that all abuse victims don't speak out. The fact that you even have legal protection is what helps you. It is what that is most important, and that means that even at our worst case, we still beat that because you still have some form of legal representation. Whereas on their side, they're shunned by society and they're less likely to take about domestic abuse or abuse when you no longer institutionalize marriage, when you no longer have the legal rigid frameworks to protect you. I'd like to also point out then about how there's not as much power inequality. I think it's just important to point out that sometimes in queer couples, they also like to, I say they're fine with also binary portrayals sometimes, because sometimes, here's the thing, panel. Queer community isn't something as rigid as a proposition defines it. Everybody has their own beliefs. Everybody has their own values. Some queer people will be fine with binary portrayals or being the most submissive one. I'm still unclear why is it so that it must be like that. It must be always like that. I'm still unclear why people are opposed against it. I'd like to also point out then about how special unique dynamics and how we're able to change social norms. I like to point out that the way you change social norms is not by going into political schizophrenia, pulling in something extremely new that disturbs the current norm, where you lose all support because those who supported you find it hard to justify. People who wanted to fight for institutionalized marriage on their side, for in the queer community, now are getting opposed. You create fractionalism. Panel, note how proposition never engaged with this. They never engaged and told us why fractionalism doesn't happen. Because what happens is that then, because now there is conflicting ideologies and also incentives. Because now you have one group that wants to fight for the institutionalized marriage, but then now the other group wants to fight for other things. And so what happens is that you split up the entire movement as a whole. This is bad for two reasons. Because number one, it is clear that you aren't going to get as much of an impact when this occurs, but you also lose support and buy-in. Because what happens at institutionalized marriage is something that's so important to them. To reject it is to also reject society. That means rejecting anybody else who isn't within it and also supports this institutionalized marriage. We think that then this leads to my extension about microaggression being something that is relatively common. Because here's the thing, when you say, and let's take them at their best, and you implement this institutionalized marriage, which I would like to point out, that means rejecting all forms of it, which means that you are rejecting the union itself. I would like to point out, do not let them squirrel away on this. The whole idea of the institutionalized marriage was the legal and societal recognition that it was a union of people. To go against it is to go against the idea or concept of marriage itself. But here's the bad thing also. It actually doesn't give you a metric to define whether it's true love. Because what happens is that, as we have said and characterized you, that what happens is that when you are legally represented in society, that when you say, I'm now finally legally recognized as a queer couple, that means now I'm actually at the greatest form of romance. I'm at the greatest peak, and now I'm able to love it equally. Whereas on their side, they don't have any form because they're not even empowered, they're not even recognized. We think that then in Taisei movements where you say something that is extremely radical, this subconsciously seeps into them. This means that what happens is that at the end of the day, these people working in the queer movements now are against marriage in and of itself, legal representation of marriage, and thus it looks like things in life like tiny microaggressions, and this is why we are proud to oppose.
All right, I'd like to thank this speaker for the fine speech, and now inviting the third speaker from top.
Am I audible and visible?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Let me set my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I want to clarify what our case is actually about, right? Our position says that we're taking the soft stance, but I disagree. We are, in fact, we're taking the hard stand, and in our counterfactual, we've explained that we are actively discouraging queer people to marry. So we don't care about the straight people. We only care about these queer people, and we don't want them to marry as an institution. That's what we are fighting for, right? So on to my responses, right? Opposition tells us that we lose the fight for legal representation, but I have many problems with this statement, right? Firstly, in the status quo, there are already many liberal countries where marriage as an institution is still not legalized, right? Like the US, like UK and whatnot, right? So it's unclear what this legal representation and this legal protection will look like under their side of the house, right? Because even if I have one contract, the many other institutions like hospitals, government services, etc., I still might get rejected for them, and I still face a challenge when I deal with these institutions, right? And also note that like in the US, trans people are literally rejected by healthcare institutions. No, thank you. But secondly, it's unclear what benefits you can get through legal representation. And the only example they gave us is domestic abuse, right? But we've already taken down domestic abuse in my previous speaker, where we told you that domestic abuse isn't because of the legal system, but if domestic abuse does happen, the people are scared to speak up about it anyways. If it doesn't matter what kind of relationship it is, if it happens, there's still gonna be like people not speaking up about it, so it's symmetrical on both sides. But even if we buy this and we are charitable, right, we tell you that domestic abuse is just really rare and doesn't really happen that often. So I think that you are actually engaging in our worst case. We tell you that how we want people who define their relationship however they want, right? So if they want to like say that their husbands, like you're my husband and the other person's also the husband, it doesn't matter. You just don't need to go through the legal contract. So if they want to like have that marriage status, we think it's fine. It's just you don't need an institution. You don't need that legal contract. That's what we want, right? Also, last thing, right? We tell you that legal representation does not equal normal. It's very unclear why just because you have a contract, you're suddenly normal in society. I'll take that later. Because even though some countries like legalize gay marriage, like Finland, like the Scandinavian countries, whatever, right? There are always still going to be conservatives that's deem you as not normal, and they're still gonna be insane. There's still gonna be against you. I'll take your POI.
When you get legal representation in marriage, that means they legally recognize your gender and your queerness. That means that in and of itself, they have to legally recognize other things. This looks like you no longer being shunned or not being able to obtain healthcare.
Okay, we still think that we've told you that many these legally these contracts, right? There are still many flaws within it, right? Because there are many like terms and conditions, and opposition has yet to engage where with our claim where we state that these polyamory relationships, it's very hard for them to actually get like be included within these terms and conditions, and people must now submit to these terms. So it's just not inclusive on your side of the house, right? And also, I just don't think that this contract is very necessary, because if I'm not married, my status as like a person in like the government system, I'm just like a single person, and I don't need to go through all these all these legal processes. And as a normal individual, as a normal person, regardless of my relationship status, I still think I can access a lot of the benefits and the services that you want to provide, right? Moving on to my clashes on empowerment, right? On side government, they tell us that queer people getting married can empower them. On opposition, we tell you that we don't want these queer people to avoid bite to social norms, right? So let's analyze this. On government, there's no explanation as to why marriage is the determining factor of being accepted into society, right? It's just very unclear on their side of the house. We tell you multiple times that if you, on your side of the house, queer couples are going to feel pressured and obligated to get married, because in status quo, there's a current narrative where marriage is not, it's no thank you, it's often the end goal of a relationship, right? We tell you because these queer couples, they are like influenced by this idea, they will want their relationship to be seen as concrete. They're not gonna feel free anymore, and they're due to social pressure, they're gonna feel obligated to get married to make their relationship like solid and concrete, right? But secondly, we tell you that if this happens, then the marriage, this queer marriage, will only be like you're oppressive in your own marriage because you must now submit to social norms. For example, childbearing, splitting finance, signing legal contracts, going through a lot of these legal contracts, and who's the bride, who's the groom, etc. Right? You have to go through heteronormal expectations now being pushed on them, right? And thirdly, we tell you that now you're going to get more opposition from conservatives, even if opposition tells us that conservatives don't like they're not that many. They still exist everywhere, right? So marriage as a concept is very sacred to these conservative and religious groups. This looks like marriages, they have like straight marriages, they happen in churches, they have rituals and traditions, etc. Right? So when conservatives see you think into their norm, they're gonna become mad because they feel like you're invading and stealing their identity, right? And even if there's
POI.
even if there's like only like somewhat like little conservatism in that area, the moment you like more and more queer people into marriage as an institution, these conservatives will then become more extreme and start growing rapidly. They will start to rise because they become angry at what you're doing. And then that area, you're going to make it even more conservative because of these people who are like being aggravated and them wanting to shut you down, right? But lastly, on opposition, we tell you that you're only going to harm the principle and of the core of like the social movement, right? Because marriage is inherently a social norm. We've told you that the queer movement is to go against the social norm, right? Adapting marriage means you're submitting to these social norms, you're submitting to what these straight people want to do. But that is not the point of the movement. We have told you that
POI.
queer members will become disillusioned within their own movement. They will feel disconnected. They'll feel less empowered, and the community doesn't feel like a safe space to them anymore, right? Therefore, there's only going to be less inclusivity within your own movement. And know that everything I've just said was unengaged within the first two speakers of um opposition. So it still stands, right? Government, we tell you that we are able to change and redefine the social institution of marriage for queer people. We are able to tell them to go against social norm to and to further uproot the principle of the queer movement. We tell you that people have the choice to define their relationships. You can call yourself boyfriends, you can call yourself husbands, call yourself wives, whatever. You can be in a poly relationship. You can define yourself however you want. That freedom, that is exclusive to our side, and that is empowerment, right? And lastly, we tell you there's going to be less polarization and opposition on our side because you're not doing things that aggravate these groups. You're not doing things that cause them to rise up, cause them to come and do like this conservatives group to come up, right? We tell you we get like better empowerment, right? And even in their best case, where people like everyone's like accepts your marriage and stuff, we tell you that even if people start accepting you as your marriage, it's still harmful to the queer people because you still need to go through all these expectations and heteronormative expectations, and you're just submitting to them. And I think that's just very harmful, very harmful.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker for this speech, and now I'm inviting the opposition.
Wait a second, let me organize my notes. start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, today we prove to you why is it so important to have legal contracts and system to act as a safe net and a protection for these queer communities who are the most vulnerable to fall back. And in my speech today, I will be reviewing the main rebuttals and call-outs and two main clashes of this debate. First, I want to point out a few major mistakes, major holes on proposition case. First, they are being extremely uncharitable and they never engage with our framing, which I will further explain later on. Third, they lack of analytical link and they assert stuff. I'll be starting out with some rebuttals. First, they say something like, oh, there will be like pressure and obligation for these people to get married, and their whole case is built upon this. But when you say that, queer people are like completely like out of the social norm already, I'm unsure that why the society will still pressure you and like force you to get married, because like this is like kind of not explained surely on their side. And then this is there is a crucial need for like legal representation to lead them to like fight harder to fulfill the goal of the queer movement, which is to get accepted by the society and getting equal treatment, which that is what we want to like push on our side, and they never engage. Why every normal people like can get protection through legal system and get approved by the authorities, and queer community just can't do that? So they will get motivated, they will like try to fight hard, and we will also like change the marriage system to like accommodate for that. We can't just like, they're just being uncharitable. Second, they talk about there's a lot of like conservative people and stuff, but we want to say that discrimination and conservative people happens on both sides, and I'll explain later in my class. And then they also talk about they want to like rebut our like point about domestic abuse, and they say that there will be a lot of domestic abuse laws to like protect them too. But like we want to say that at least on our side, at the worst case scenario, we already get legal protection and guarantee, which and they say that domestic abuse law can protect them, but they are like assuming our worst case on their case at best, because most of the time these people are scared to like even get legal protection from the domestic laws, because they are like look as like not normal people, right? They are like weird, so I don't see how they can get the courage to like fight for their equality. Plus, going through a whole law procedure is like so costly and requires so much resources, as on our side, when marriage certificate is already a powerful legal protection for you. And then they also say something like, oh, so the love of queer people are like even better, even like more powerful and stuff. But note how that this is like so assertive, and they completely lack of analytical link in this thing, because like it's not like it's so assertive to say that, oh, these people are like getting discriminated on, they like been through so much, so they will love each other more. So we need to like accept the fact that there's still some people who like, that are greedy and like will have some like that are toxic. So domestic abuse happens on both sides, and I don't see why on their side they are saying that, oh, they don't have this kind of thing, because they are like queer people love each other more. Okay, and I would like to do a small like worst case and best case scenario, because on our side, at the worst case scenario, at least we have some guaranteed legal protection, which is already said before, and like it also encouraged them to like fight for equal treatment, right? While on their worst case scenario, they are like completely getting discriminated and isolated by the society, making queer movement even harder to proceed, and creating a never-ending circle which they are stuck to, which they are marginalized, which they are seen as a normal people. And I would also like to rebut that we say that, oh, like it's not like legal contracts are going to like make these people like suddenly to become normal, right? There's still gonna be conservation stuff, but like if they legally recognize you, if the like society and the government legally recognize you as part of the member of the society, at least you get protected. And you won't get like discriminated on that much, because to do so is to go against the state. And like on their side, when you're not like part of the legal system, you will face like more discrimination, more like ostracization and marginalization when you don't normalize it. Okay. And now I'll be reviewing the two main clash of this debate. So first, which side is better for the queer community, right? Second, which side is better for the society as a whole? So first, which side can better benefits the queer community? So when discrimination and conservatives happen on both sides, we prove to you why discrimination on their side is even worse, because government is trying to like worsen the discrimination when you like further reinforce it, when the movements that is against social norms, like for example, oh, I don't need to like get approval for marriage, I can just do it like whenever I want, or like, yeah, this is like against the social norm, and it will only increase the stigma and discrimination against these people, right? So when marriage is perceived as a holy matrimony and union of two people in the status quo, especially from the older generations, what will happen when you go against this? It will only create more discrimination and more stigma against these queer people, making queer movement even harder, as we already stated before. This is what opposition trying to support. Yes, POI accepted.
I am a cis gay man who is single. Will I be rejected from the hospital?
Can you repeat that again?
If I am a cis gay man who is single, will I be rejected from the hospital?
This is why we are trying to change this, right? From taking the first step to actually approve them as part of the society, as part of the marriage institution, when they can also like get like the same kind of like marriage approval and legal protection. This is when the queer movement starts to like starts to be more effective, and then we are like trying to change this. Then afterwards, we can like slowly change this. We can also change like people opinions to these like queer people, and like the government will also like try to change hospital and other institution after the change of the marriage institution. So this is like really important as to act as a first step to like of the queer movement. So to continue on our side, we not only provide equal treatment like to like everyone, including the queer community, we also provide legal approval, which contributes to the mitigation of discrimination by the society. When the government and legal institution take the first step to like accept these queer people, right? And then secondly, which side can better benefit the society? So on our side, we win this clash because like we are changing people's opinion rather than like letting queer people living in their own world and living out of the social norm and keep getting marginalized, getting discrimination on. So with this, I've never been prouder to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker for this speech, and now for the reply speeches, inviting opposition reply.
I assume I'm not inaudible.
Yeah.
Panel. Proposition's case falls when we show you the delta. The delta of today's debate was who empowers people now, not about backlash. Because note how their entire push about backlash from conservatives falls when we say that no matter what, conservatives will always oppose the queer movement. That was the crux on what opposition debated on. That is to say that no matter what, it was the act of it that inflamed that. That means that insofar as a proposition tries to say, oh, we're still going to have marriage, they're still going to get shot at, they're still going to get discriminated against. But here's the difference. Opposition makes a unique substantive. That is, we're able to change it long term. This is why our reply clears up today's debate. Number one, point out then why is it so that legal representation of marriage and institutionalization was so important and needed. Number one, that it is needed to ensure that you actually have the first part of normalization, because the first part of normalization is to integrate into society, is to get largely accepted. You cannot be accepted in society where you're trying to act unique, where you're trying to act different. I still don't get why is it so, and this is the logical link that they've been missing from first to last about how they'll be able to obtain buy-in when they're different. Because panel, people are afraid of those who are different. People like to alienate them, use xenophobia rhetoric against them. This is exactly why conservatives on their side will be even more empowered, because they're able to say, look at them trying to defile it, trying to take our marriage that's so important to us and defile it to use for their own means. I like to point out that marriage is required. When you get marriage as an institution, you set a precedent. You set a precedent that now queer people are accepted. I like to point out that why it's so much easier for us to achieve this, because everybody in the queer community wants that. They want to focus on it. They never engage with our characterization of why people hold marriage to such a high regard, because it was the greatest form of love. Because insofar as proposition never dealt with that, that meant that queer couples on their side have no value to their relationship, that they're unable to make up for it because they're no longer legally represented, that they no longer have any legal representation, thus they feel that their entire thing is hollow. But let's take them at their best. And I say then, this is where we win, clearly, because of the long term. Because fine, conservatives will always be conservatives. But the delta is long term. When you set the precedent, future generations are going to be less against it. When they realize that, oh, same-sex marriage is allowed, queer marriage is allowed, they'll be less likely to go against it. Because to go against it is to go against the government. Thus, you have some sort of legal protection. Do not buy the gaslighting by proposition, saying about how there's still issues like Malaysian not being accepted at hospitals. Because on their side, it happens also. I'm still unclear how they're able to mechanize this and achieve that on their side. They never explained to us what was the counterfactual on obtaining this. Let's be comparative, because what happens is that I like to point out that people on both sides want marriage. But the difference at Delta was simple. Is that on our side, we at least gave them legal representation, something to work off and finally get representation, to break the shackles of oppression that has been placed upon us in society. Here's the comparative then. What does proposition give to you? They have no mechanism, they have no metric for love and how to define the best form of romantic love. Number two, that they get no legal representation, that they're still going to get ostracized in society insofar as you don't have this, because all three speakers have said about how important this is. Whereas on opposition, you get three main benefits. Number one, that you normalize this, you get acceptance. Number two, that you obtain buy-in when you no longer inflame. When you try to integrate into society, people are more likely to buy into it rather when you are unique. Proposition needed to prove that. But even then, we say that this is better because this is a slow corrosion of the values that these conservatives have. When you slowly corrode away at it, when you finally get accommodation, do note how proposition tries to gaslight about how they're going to try and fit in it. No, us as the queer movement will want to make it so where the marriage institution tries and accommodates us, where we are finally part of the marriage institutionalized. This is why, if you wanted a world that actually helped the queers, please support opposition.
All right, so I'd like to thank the speaker from opposition, and now inviting the last and proposition play speaker to conclude the debate. Yeah.
Hello, am I audible and am I visible?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I want to just say that everyone in this debate has been insane. So, and also I'm very happy to be here. Okay, no POI, so that's that. Okay. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Proposition has less analysis than they have nuance in this debate. And I think the final outcome of our side is a simple reality that opposition is disillusioned with the loss they will take. There's two nuances necessary to immediately reduce the deconstructives from opposition that wins us this case. But I want to just first deal with something. Opposition completely forgot some very important thing at the start of our setup, perhaps. That's called the counterfactual. So let me remind them one last time before they're kicked off quads. We want to defend marriage as a subjective human experience that is not legal or social. The counterfactual here is that we don't want the terms and conditions that come from institutional marriage. And we think that these harm come to manifest under their side because the terms and conditions that are implemented socially are only there by the social institutions that have set them to be that way. We think then they've completely not engaged on anything other than, oh, we are like saying on their worst case or whatever. But I think that they've just forgotten our first argument as a whole. I think what we've been greater trying to prove is just why everything coming from the LO and the extension coming from the DLO has been systematically reduced to a scrap of dust. So let's move on. Let's move on to what they do tell us. They tell us two things: that not everyone is a religious conservative person, and marriage is a sacrosanct that will threaten the identity of those under legitimate marriage. First, let's just make a structural note on the first one, because they've been very contradictory. At the start of their LO, they told us, oh, not everyone is conservative. And they kind of do that in DLO. But throughout the opposition whip and then the op reply, they tell us, oh, there's like some conservative people, and like conservative people exist under both sides anyway, so like this is symmetrical. Now, if they've just said that, doesn't that take an entire extension and argument out of their case? So, whoop, I guess that's that. But I think the first thing that we need to just say is that while society is growing more and more progressive, it doesn't mean that the entire society is very nice to these people. It's precisely the increasing discourse and polarization of the two sides that's driving the gap between the left and the right and increasing the verbal violence that occurs between them. If we had such a progressive society in the first place, then I don't think we'd be debating this motion, right? And I think there's just two very simple questions I want to ask everyone here in order to prove this. How many trans people do you see being accepted on the international stage? How many polyamorous marriages have you ever seen? Fair enough. The second thing, and in the response, okay, they do say that straight individuals have to reject the premise of institutions of marriage. And by the Lord, we agree, but they only have to reject the premise of institution of marriage for queer people. Has there ever been a statement about the rejection of the premise for straight people too? No. Has there ever been any engagement about why this is the case? No. We tell you that we are able to flip this all the way from PM is that when queer people enter institutional marriage, it results in the conservatives' perception that their sacrosanct rituals are being diluted and salted by the queers. And that's a direct threat to their identity within the lashing out under the comparative of their side that we tell you don't exist under our side, precisely because queer people entering their communities and entering their rituals is something that they are incredibly, incredibly opposed to. We then tell you that the main push from Op about like how marriage is the first step is to being seen as normal is like completely ridiculous. First question, is this analyzed? It's not. There's a big gap of analysis between why marriage is acknowledgement and other than like, ooh, fancy legal institution that's widely accepted. The reason why this isn't the case is just that these queers are already seen as not normal. How do you be acknowledged anyway if they'll just see you as not normal marriage? Legal legitimacy does not result in social legitimacy. Second question, does this give them the impact they're claiming? No. For things like domestic abuse, there's already other structures like social assault and battery that's like violence. So like I don't see why this is important and like even brought up. But the second thing on rights as a whole and the type of legal framework that exists is precisely for couples and marriages. Things like divorce frameworks, tax benefits, or loans, these only increase the importance of the metrics of social normality and worsen the lack of freedom. The third question is whether this is worth the principal harm. And the exclusive benefit is the empowerment of the people's unique relationships from a subjective perspective from the CF. If we've been defending this from the very start, it's not engaged with, we think that they can at no point outweigh this because they don't even give us a win for it. So great, we win. Proud to propose.
All right. I'd like to thank the speaker for this speech. And lastly, I'd like to thank everyone for the engaging debate. You can now virtually shake hands, but also I think we will move into breakout room for our deliberation. So wait in the main hall till the result announcements. Thank you everyone for the debate.
Thanks
Thank you so much for the
everyone.
debate.
You guys were great.